Hello, everybody. Sorry for the little technical delay before we got started, but everybody's here and we're very, very excited to talk to you. I personally am most excited about this panel out of everything today because we're really going to be able to share stories and talk about why storytelling is so powerful. I'm very honored to co-host this panel alongside Aparna Bhattacharya. Did I say your last name right?
Yep, you said it right.
Aparna is the ED of Raksha. We are also joined here today by Feroza Saeed, Ben Haseen, and Ting Tran, all of which are amazing community activists within Atlanta and do so much good for our communities. So thank you all for doing this. Thank you all for being here today. I'm so excited to ask y'all some questions. As someone who identifies as non-binary, is part of the LGBTQ community, all these other amazing intersections that I celebrate. I unfortunately know really well how, especially in the anti-violence space, stories like ours are not typically held in the same regard as folks who may be cisgender or white and female. We also know that in our country, especially in a moment like right now, our intersections are not celebrated. And in fact, they put us in harm's way. And it makes us more marginalized, and that pain that we experience, right, from classism, racism, ableism, etc., are all extensions and rooted in anti-Blackness, xenophobia, misogynoir, and white supremacy. And I really thank you all for coming out here and sharing your stories today, because I do know, unfortunately, that most folks who identify like we do don't have these opportunities presented. So again, thank you so much. I don't want any of you feel that you need to minimize your experiences. We are all adults here, and what happened to you happened, and it makes you all beautiful. So I'm really excited to get started today and to hear about all of yours. So I'm going to start with some introduction so everyone can get to know each other a little bit more. So Aparna, who on my screen is in the top row, third one, she has served as the executive director of Raksha since 1998. Over the years, she has been part of creating organizations like Tapestry and the International Women's House to meet the needs of immigrant and refugee survivors. She served as the board vice president for the Cross Keys Foundation in 2011, with much of Aparna's work is focused on the training and needs of underserved communities. She was a White House Champion of Change in May 2013 with other Asian American women leaders. In 2018, she received the Hope for Tomorrow Award from the International Women's House for her advocacy work. Ben Haseen is a trans man and one of the first openly trans persons of South Asian descent attending medical school within the United States. He is passionate about LGBTQA+ access to medicine and advocates for universal healthcare rights. He is a published author and researcher focusing on health disparities that affect marginalized. He's active on Instagram and hosts the Ben Haseen channel on YouTube, where he talks about being trans in the healthcare field. Lastly, he is a very proud cat dad to a very blessed baby. Next up, we have Ting Tran. They Them is a self-taught artist based in Atlanta, Georgia, based on Muskogee land. Their art is primarily inspired by their experiences navigating existence as a Chinese, queer, non-binary femme. Their work aims to amplify the struggles of oppressed communities, provide racial education, and show the beauty of collective resistance through vibrant colors, elements of surrealism, and portraiture. Feroza Saeed, who is here as well, uses she, her pronouns, is a trans activist and advocate. He was one of the appointees to Mayor Keisha Lance Bottom's historic first LGBTQ advisory board for the city of Atlanta. After coming out again in a viral Facebook post as a trans woman living in anonymity, Feroza has quickly jumped into activism head on. She worked as a facilitator for the PFLAG John Creek and with numerous organizations in the Atlanta area, such as GSCC, Georgia State Schools Coalition, Atlanta Asian Q&A, Queer and Adolescent, which most of us on this call are a part of, and DesiQ Diaspora to create a safe space for Asian and Pacific Islander youth. She has spoken at multiple schools and colleges, has been featured in magazines and articles, and recently hosted Stonewall Pride celebrations in Atlanta in June. In 2018, she was appointed Aid Atlanta Ambassador, and in 2019, she was the Grand Marshal for Atlanta's 50th Pride celebration. She works with groups locally to help with intersectionality, specifically cultural and religious background issues targeting the Asian LGBT community in order to build a safe space for that community. She also spends her time bringing light to the struggles of trans and LGBTQ communities, specifically for people of color, LGBTQ youth. Personally, Feroza is an associate broker for Atlanta Fine Homes, Sotheby's International Realty. She's a top producer for them, selling millions in real estate annually. She has two lovely fur babies named Bella and Teddy, and currently resides in Northeast Atlanta and has been in the Atlanta area for close to 30 years. For everyone here, please give a round of applause for some amazing panelists that we have out.
Janani, I'm labeled as you. I don't know how to change that. On Zoom, I just click on it, but I don't know if you can change my name from
that's
you.
Weird. Really? On my end, it says Feroza. Does it say Jenny?
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I didn't know.
You for all of us.
Okay.
You too, so.
Okay. You too. Cool. Just want to make sure my name's on there.
No worries. Thank you again so much for your time today. I'm so excited to have these conversations today. So I was hoping first we can go around and talk about why we're here and what are intersections. So my first question, whoever wants to go first, is what does intersections mean to you? How have your intersections affected your dating life? And what is storytelling to you? I'll pick.
So I'll go ahead and go. Cool. Intersections to me is who I am altogether. As daughter of Indian immigrants, as somebody who is quite obviously brown, a woman, a Muslim, and trans, I just have so many different unique identities that make me who I am. That when I think of the word intersection, I literally think of all the different things that make me who I am. As far as how my intersections have affected my dating, as a trans woman who is binary, but also has what's called passing privilege. And for those of you who don't know what passing privilege is, it means that as a trans person, you fit into what society thinks you should look like as the gender you've transitioned into. So being born male, but transitioning into a woman, I look like a woman. I'm about 5'4". If I didn't tell you that I was a trans woman, you wouldn't likely know. I was married for almost 12 years and my in-laws didn't know. So if that tells you about how much passing privilege I have. But why it's affected me in my dating life is that when I have to disclose, or when you tell the person that you're potentially dating that you're a trans person, often I have been encountered with a lot of violence and aggression, from people who are quite misogynistic or patriarchal. I've also been fetishized, which means that people specifically look for me as a trans woman because of what they're attracted to or whatnot, which sometimes leads to a space of exotification or treating me kind of inhuman, if that makes sense. Right. More like an object than like a person. Mm-hmm. And that disclosure portion for me has been wrought with a lot of violence. I have been, just like the 32 trans people that have been murdered this year, I have been thrown down stairwells. I have been spit on. I have been choked out to the point of almost blacking out at my car. And I've also been pretty violently sexually assaulted. So when we're talking about these intersections and how it affects marginalized communities, we have to speak of this violence that we think is okay against trans femmes. And it's definitely something that I've encountered in my life. And for your final portion of your question, what is storytelling and how have I used storytelling in my advocacy? Storytelling for me is everywhere. It's when you run across somebody in, a gas station, or they ask you a question about one of your bumper stickers, or advocacy wise, when I'm speaking in colleges or schools or on my social media, just talking about being vulnerable and talking about some of those stories of being assaulted or just being visible in general. So storytelling to me is a big portion of my advocacy because I use it on a day-to-day to humanize the trans experience and to go out and make sure that people see me as a person and understand that they're relatable to me. And as far as how has storytelling been a part of my advocacy, it's been a big part of making sure that, as I just said, humanizing myself to others. It's a very large portion of it. I think that people are often afraid of what they don't know. And when we tell these stories, however painful they may be, often it opens up a space for people to find similarities in themselves with you. And what that often leads to is, some sort of relatability, and then in turn, opening them up slowly.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your vulnerability and also just your overall message. It's so true. I definitely feel people if they don't understand it, they're more likely to be upset about it than to try to. And I think that's definitely something we need to change, right? Yeah. Who wants to go next?
I can go next. Similar to what Feroza says, I think intersections are very important, but also to realize the intersections of where you have privilege as well. Like, I live in the United States. I have the privilege of living in the United States. I pass as a man, which gives me that privilege, even though I was assigned female at birth and I was socialized as female growing up. I have the privilege of presenting to the outside world as a man. And I do benefit from that privilege, but also realizing that I've come very far from where I have been from. That's very important as well. So when someone is looking at their own life, it's very important. I really want to hone in on this, is to acknowledge the privileges that you have and constantly working against that privilege to further educate yourself. For part 2, how has my intersections affected my dating life? As a trans man, I don't experience the same form of physical violence as trans women do, but I do get a lot of these stereotypes of expectations of men by society, and these stereotypes I'm kind of expected to fit them, which I don't. Although I present as masculine, a huge part of me is not very masculine as well. I'm a very soft, tender-hearted person, and it does affect my dating life, especially when I talk to cisgender women or cisgender men. They ask me questions about, like, why are you so short? Men aren't short, and like I get things like that. But also I get inappropriate questions because I've always been open about being trans. I always put in my dating profiles that I'm a transgender male because it helps me weed out anyone who would ask me very inappropriate questions, but also as a form of safety as well for me, because if I'm talking to someone and I don't reveal I'm trans and then I reveal I'm trans, I might get a lot of pushback against that. But also, even being open about it, I get really inappropriate questions. I've also been a victim of dating violence as well, when I came to dating someone who was less informed about what it means to date a trans person. And I think the last part is, what is storytelling for you? I've always, as a researcher who researches trans healthcare and LGBTQ health and marginalized health, I've always liked to integrate story into the research that I do. I think that's very important because a lot of researchers, all they care about is numbers. But my research is what I call advocacy research. I tell a story and I say why this matters and why you should care as a healthcare provider. And that's how I weave in storytelling. My research is very provocative. I've gotten a lot of comments from very, very strategic, numbers-oriented researchers, but I honestly don't care about their opinion, and I just keep going with what I'm passionate about.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ben. Tang Aparna?
Take a stab at these questions. Okay. So intersections to me, intersections to me is just like, we have so many identities. No one is a monolith. And like even just like a combination of different, I don't even like the word categories or whatever fall into, like everyone's experience with oppression will be different. And so like if you're trying to destroy oppression, you got to do it for everyone and not just like white women, like cis people and stuff like that. It's got to be for everybody. People with disabilities, trans people, everything. For me, like I'm, I'll just talk about how I've been affected by my intersections. I'm a femme, non-binary femme, Chinese, so obviously I present as a femme as well, so I'm oftentimes misgendered, which is very common. And with dating in particular, I mean, at this point, I'm avoiding men, so I haven't had as many issues as I had past when I was like dating a lot of men. Like, oh my gosh, fetishization of Asian, especially like East Asian people, is super common. It's really gross. Like, I hate it. That's something I have to deal with as well. And then yeah, I mean, people treat me like a woman. Men have always, and that's not necessarily a good thing. I think there is a privilege in me presenting the way I do, but also like there's also the risk of like women face, especially like marginalized women face every day, just walking out the streets, getting cat constantly, you know, even sexual violence, stuff like that. So yeah, it's definitely affected me, but that's why I avoid men.
Awesome. Aparna, do you want to go? Oh, hold on.
Storytelling question.
Oh yeah, sorry, Tang, your storytelling. Yeah, what does that mean to you?
Well, definitely just like storytelling is super broad. Anything for me, I mean, tell a story about my personal experiences, tell other people's stories, of course, with their like, you know, with a, you know, you have to tell their story, not to like make money like that Hulu freaking documentary on Breonna Taylor, but to like actually tell their story because they can't get it out in the way that might make impact.
Right.
Awesome.
Awesome. Aparna?
Well, I'll go with intersections are the complex identities, whether it's, you know, being the child of immigrants, but also raised in the South with a Southern identity, to being South Asian, and thinking like post 9/11, how even though I was born and raised in the US, people still looked at me funny and I felt really unsafe in the community that I grew up in. So that's kind of how intersections kind of play out for me in, you know, it's just our complex identities, what you see and what you don't see. And then how that impacts how we may interact with systems. Like if, you know, someone has, if someone is queer and, you know, an immigrant and is undocumented, like how much more complicated that would be in them accessing safety and what their worries would be. And so that's how I see intersections. To be honest, I can't talk about intersections in dating because it's been a long time since I've dated. I'm the older one in the crowd. So,
do you want to talk about maybe what you see as a service provider?
Yeah, I think it's very complicated. I think part of the things is, even if as we're talking about dating violence, if someone's undocumented, the fears of being able to even talk about the violence that they're experiencing, or if they're not supposed to be dating, right? How do you tell your family that you're in a violent relationship when you're not even supposed to be dating in the first place? And then if it's outside of your culture or your religion, how complicated that can be. How do you get help? And I think one of the things in our community that we see is that, you know, whether it's sexual assault or dating violence, a lot of young people in our community don't feel safe accessing or telling anybody, and they're suffering in silence because of all these multiple identities, and their parents haven't had that dialogue of, you can come to me if you're dating, even though I don't want you to be dating, that, you know, it's safe. So that's the things. There's a lot of folks, young folks, who are suffering silence, even when they're calling our organization. They're just so scared of their family finding out, and we're not going to share it. But that's a huge fear because it's so close-knit and there's such a huge stigma. As far as storytelling and how it's important, it's the opportunity to make things real. A lot of what I do is talk about culture and intersections. And I think when you tell those stories, that's the way people can feel their hearts move and understand things that they may not understand. And that's how we overcome a lot of hate, is by our storytelling. And that's how I've even seen when we've done panels of talking about trans community, folks who are in the room who might be negative, when they see someone in front of them and they hear their story, it really moves them to a place of better understanding and better support. And for me, that's been beautiful to see, to bring more support to many of my friends and family members.
Yeah, I really resonated with what you said about the, you know, should I even talk about it to my family, you know? And I know that our cultural competency workshop earlier talked about shame, especially like within our cultures, honor is something that is so highly regarded. I know, like, for me, I think Ben knows this story. I don't know if the rest of y'all know this story, but like, I didn't even tell my mom about my dating partner until last summer because a marriage proposal, my family still does arranged marriage, a marriage proposal had been made on my name. And then I had to be like, kind of have someone I'm cool with right now, but thanks for looking out. But yeah, like, that's still a real thing. And like, that's a funny story, but like, definitely, talking to family members about being queer, that is a whole can of worms to have to jump into, especially with cultural differences, especially with cultural perceptions of the LGBTQ community. Yeah, so I'm excited to kind of get into asking y'all some questions. So I'm going to start off with Ben, our honorable first openly trans person of South Asian descent attending a U.S. med school. That's such an accomplishment, and we are all so proud to share space with your brilliance. So I know you were talking about your advocacy research. So I kind of wanted to ask you, how have your intersections guided and shaped your interest in medical activism?
When I first started medical school, I realized there's a lot of assumptions about queer people that a lot of med students and faculty were making, especially when it came to like our health. Usually there was a huge emphasis on our sexual health. And I'm like, we're more than just, sexual beings. Like, that's very important that you're focusing on sexual health of LGBTQ people, but that's also creating a bias. Like, every time someone who's queer would come into an office, the physician would immediately go to asking them about their sex life. And I'm like, that's very inappropriate because this is a person. This person has other health aspects about them. And knowing the queer population in Atlanta, a lot of us are not wealthy. A lot of us don't have Medicare. A lot of us don't have access to medicine. So there are important aspects of someone's health that we need to focus on. So when I first started medical school, my goal was to actually start exposing my faculty and my fellow students that like queer people are more than just sexual health, that you have to focus on other things. And a lot of people were ignorant to trans healthcare as well, even though trans healthcare is super important. Some people didn't even know that transgender people can be homosexual, and I was like, gender and sexuality is very different. So that's what I've been really, really focusing on. But another huge part of me is changing the current systems that don't work. And that is a huge feat to work with. But I've been working with my school, especially with our school's free clinics, about like making it more gender inclusive. But also our clinics offer free visits, but how can we make free access to medications more available? And one way is finding resources so they can go to charity pharmacies. Grady has one, and just rerouting. If a patient needs a colonoscopy, our clinic doesn't offer colonoscopies. We're not that robust. So where can they go to get access to those colonoscopies for free or even a reduced price? And it's just being aware of some patients may not even get the care that they need. What can we do so that they're somewhat better? What can we put? It won't fix them, but what can we do to alleviate some of their pain?
Yeah, that's beautiful. Could you maybe share some more light as well on the research that you're conducting?
Yeah.
And why that it's important to like give exposure to that type of research?
Yeah, so my whole research, my first year of medical school was how can we make OBGYN clinics more accessible for transmasculine individuals? And one thing that I really focused on is that transgender men and transmasculine individuals can get pregnant and they need prenatal care. A lot of things, transgender men and transmasculine individuals usually avoid OBGYN clinics because one is a very dysphoric place for them because there's a lot of terminology specific to femmes. But how can we change that language to be more inclusive for all genders, not just transmasculine people? But also, I push doctors a lot. I push them and I told them, why don't you post pictures of pregnant transgender men in your clinic? That would make people really comfortable. And it's just, and even in my poster, every single researcher that I worked with, I put their pronouns on my poster, which is very different from traditional research. And this year, I worked on health access to colonoscopies for Black men and addressing Black maternal mortality as well. And I made sure during this project that I worked with a Black researcher as well, because I see in research all these non-Black people doing research about Black people. And that to me is very problematic because I feel like Black people need to be involved in that form of research. So I made sure the research that I did today, this year involved Black researchers helping me with my research.
Yes, Ben and I both know very well about projects that don't have appropriate leadership in their research. So I think that's a really great point. Ting, so this makes me think of you because you also have like this really unique niche for your activism. And I will say Ting is such a talented artist. And one thing I always love about your art is you show the beauty or the pain in spaces that are deemed untraditional by US culture. And so I kind of wanted to talk to you about that. So what in your activism, where does your visual and digital media come to play? How is that storytelling for you? And also, not to shove one more question in, but do you think, do you have any advice for young people who feel that maybe, hey, this is how I can make a difference?
Okay, so
I'll go through them one at a time if you want.
Yeah, can you read?
Yes, so the first question is, with your digital activism, with your art, how does that help you tell stories? How does that help you tell your stories? Like, how is that a tool in your organizing and activism?
Well, I definitely think visual art can have a different effect on people than, say, like suggesting them a book to read or giving them an article. It's kind of something that people can all kind of, well, like anyone who has like the ability to see can like, they can kind of like, take their own take on. Art is very subjective too, so it's not as objective as like a book because you're just saying like straight up what you think. But art is very subjective, so people can interpret it how they want as well. But I do tend to try to convey very clear messages in my art because I don't want it to be construed as some like liberal politic or anything like that. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely like a great tool. Like it has a great reach as well on social media. Public murals are awesome as well because they get a lot of visibility. So the last public mural was great. It got me. It was in like a very gentrified area of Atlanta, and I talked about like femicide in Latin American culture in Latin America and stuff like that. And so it was cool. And someone from Mexico actually saw the mural and messaged me and said that like it made them cry because they're from Mexico and that's where all these like protests were happening. So like that's the kind of shit that I do with my art. It's just like to make people feel less alone.
Yeah. Could you? I know I had one question, but I actually wanted to kind of go in a different angle. If that's okay. Sure. So you worked on the song coloring book, right? Could you talk about that project?
Yeah, so that was a cool project too. It's like another way to kind of get, political education in an engaging way to, especially like younger people and schools and stuff. I think they're planning on working with educators into like incorporating this type of stuff into their curriculum and things like that.
Sorry, could you also say what song is and what they do?
Yes, the song is Southerners on New Ground. It is a LGBTQ abolitionist organization. They do work. They have a bunch of chapters in the South. They do a lot of work around like cash bail, participatory defense, freedom mall campaigns and things like that. So yeah, that song, and I was working with the Virginia chapter on the Cash Bail book, and basically the Cash Bail book is just a coloring book of different topics. My topic was abolish ICE, and so I just made a coloring page about like ICE, and provided like some education as well. It was super cool.
Yeah, I remember seeing that tool and it's so powerful because even young folks can interact with that material in like a really engageable way, but also like understand and learn more through that art and through that experience, right? 'Cause no one wants to color an atrocity. Like that's the reality of it. But like, by putting it there, it shows that, this isn't something that we should like talk about. This is something that's just like a tag point on CNN. Like this is a real thing that really hurts people, right? Cool. So kind of moving on from there, Aparna, who I think everybody in this group can agree is the ultimate ally to the community here in Atlanta and Georgia. Aparna has had this really incredible long career in just being there for survivors, particularly Asian survivors, Middle Eastern survivors within our city. And I think every one of us come to her to talk about our own lives. So Aparna, do you have advice based on your experience on how young people who don't identify as queer can be the best allies for folks who are QT BIPOC, which are queer, transgender, Black, Indigenous, person of color?
I mean, I think as we talk about with survivors is to let individuals lead, right? And to ask our LGBTQ family and friends what they need for us and how they need to show up. I feel really blessed because I think I became a stronger ally because when Raksha first started, it was folks from the LGBTQ South Asian organization who showed up at a large, there was quite a number of them that showed up to support Raksha. And that led to me really learning more and listening more and creating space and made it really part of our culture to really show up for LGBTQ community. And of course I have a lovely gay nephew who I adore, and that makes it even more personal. And I think having been a part of Tricone or having had Tricone members a part of Raksha made it so much easier when he came out to say, here, let me connect you to community. Let me show up in a way that makes sense. So I think part of it's listening, showing up, not always having to be loud, but just being there and then letting other folks just show up. Whoa. There's some stuff.
Yeah, so I was looking around, like my stuff fell off.
Yeah. Wow.
Woo,
yeah, sorry, don't mind me. Everyone listen to Aparna. Like, I'm good.
It'll be okay if you have to run out the building and your camera's just
on the 4th floor, right? So sorry, Aparna, please go.
Yeah, I'm still always learning. I think, as I was saying before, culture is constantly changing. There's always new things to learn. And how do I still continue to connect with community, to listen, and then be there when I need to show up, right? And I think for me, the big thing is wanting to create that safety and love for my friends and family. And that's a much bigger picture. And because we do so much at dealing with the margins or dealing with folks who are not heard, for me, it's always natural to be inclusive of LGBTQ and Black communities when I'm doing my trainings. Because again, if I want immigrant communities to be respected, then I need to fight for all the other communities. And that's been a huge part of my work since I started. So.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Last but not least, Feroza, I really want to talk about your Facebook post because that was really, really awesome. And, I think nowadays a lot of young folks especially are using Twitter, Facebook, Instagram as methods for advocacy. So my first question is, would you mind kind of giving us some background info on that post and talk about what goals you had and how intentional social media usage can be like a storytelling tool? Yeah.
So oddly enough, my initial kind of coming back out post was not meant to do anything other than let my friends and family kind of know. So as a background, I had come out when I was about 18 years old. I'm almost 40. I'll be 40 next year. And when I did, I transitioned and then passed back. As I had, as I mentioned earlier, some violence, fetishization, and everything else. I really kind of moved into a space where I was living as a cisgendered woman in a sense, because I had that opportunity and I took advantage of it for my own safety and from the trauma that I had experienced. That being said, as I continued growing in my career, growing in other spaces in my life, ending up getting married and everything else, I started finding a level of unhappiness because I wasn't living my full authentic life. And that was an underlying theme for a long time. As you know, Janani, you yourself said, being in a South Asian family, you know, and the pressures of marriage and other things like that, and society. One of the things that had come up again and again with me was that all three of my brothers have nieces and nephews. And my family said that you have passing privilege, so we don't really want the kids to know about your transness unless they're old enough to kind of process that. And the fear that a child knowing about trans people might make them trans in and of themselves. I mean, it's kind of crazy, right? Like you can't.
Yeah,
I know, but in order to get comfortable and in a space where I wasn't happy nor comfortable with myself, I often found myself putting myself on the back burner and being like, okay, well, you know, whatever makes everyone happy, whatever makes everything okay. And a lot of us in the LGBTQ community, more specifically in Asian and South Asian communities, are trying desperately to keep our families and our existence at the same time, right? Like being who we are, but also finding some sort of balance of love and affection from our families. And I was willing for most of my adult life to put myself on the back burner and who I was in order to please them enough to just be accepted, if that makes sense. So building up to when I came out in 2018 was the whole 2016 election. And you know, regardless of how you feel about Trump, the one thing we can definitely agree on is that the rhetoric from the top down was obnoxious for all of the different intersections that I am. That was immigrants, brown, women, Muslim, and trans. So all this anxiety and dehumanization and marginalization on a consistent basis had got me to the point where coming into that election for the first time in my adult life, I was really depressed. And I sat back and really thought about what it was that would make me feel better. And what I realized was that, you know, I would come across on social media like this perfect, prissy girl who had this amazing real estate career and, you know, would talk about the things that I felt comfortable about, but I never really opened up about who I was and what my experiences were. For 20 years of being a trans woman in the Atlanta area, literally like 200 of my Facebook friends knew. I mean, I had done a really, really good job of hiding my past because of the experiences I had. So in 2018, on February 1st of 2018 is when I put that post up, and it went kind of semi-viral. But prior to that, I had slowly started telling people at my work, and I told my dental hygienist. I had, you know, told random people and gotten this comfort enough to be like, okay, well, everything is going to be okay. And on that day, I told my ex-mother-in-law. And once I told my ex-mother-in-law and she actually accepted me, I felt like, well, why does it matter? I'm just going to tell everybody else. And honestly, I, at the time, had, you know, a quarter of the Facebook friends I have. I had no Instagram. I had no Twitter. I had nothing. It was just, these are the people that are in my life on Facebook, and some of my clients, other people. I'm just going to make this open, and I'm done with it, because then it's over. And I thought, oh my God, I'm going to lose, you know, some clients, but it's going to be okay. That post ended up getting shared 1,000 plus times just from my page, ended up getting like 75,000 likes and shares, ultimately ended up getting picked up by Pantsuit Nation. And overnight, my life changed in a way that I had never anticipated. Like the Atlanta Journal-Constitution reached out that week, and we want to do a piece on you. And it was really, really insane. But what I did realize from that was that I had this 15 minutes of fame. And how do I utilize that to make a bigger difference for my community? And it was never really about me. It was always, how can I use this visibility to make sure that I'm promoting and pushing out what my community needs? And if I can be more visible, can I make a change for my community? So that's how I kind of head on jumped into activism from that. And since then, I think my vulnerability and being who I am is what's led to a continued thriving social media. And that's what I would give advice as far as advice to people who are doing it. Being authentic on social media is what really matters to me. There's going to be a million influencers day in, day out that you're going to be able to find on Facebook or doing makeup tutorials or other things like that. But when you're really looking to know somebody or follow somebody, or to me at least, wanting to make a change other than something kind of superficial, I look to follow people and watch people and be on social media, following people that actually stand for something and are trying to make a difference. And I think that's one of the reasons I've had some continued success in social media.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. That's so amazing. I think definitely with the young people, as they're trying to harness social media more and more, you gave some really great insight, especially with the follow the pages of people who are doing stuff, because then the algorithm will show you all of those things. Cool. So we're just about wrapping up here. I want to thank again all of our amazing panelists for coming out and sharing your knowledge, sharing your insight, being vulnerable, because in the clout culture that we live in, being vulnerable is rare, but it's honestly so beautiful when it happens. My final question for you all to close us out today is, there's so many normalized unhealthy dating norms, right? And especially for folks like us that live upon intersections, there's even more just garbage out there that, people think that it's okay on how to treat us and stuff. So if you guys could give a mantra to the younger generation to date in a way that not only affirms your intersections, but also promotes consent culture, what would that be? So for example, for me, my mantra would be, and it doesn't have to be one sentence, don't worry. But it essentially would be like, don't ever go on a date with someone who tries to tell you who you are and doesn't let you do the explaining yourself.
My mantra would be always put yourself first. No matter how much you love this person, no matter how much you die for this person, if they're doing something that doesn't make you feel good, you don't need to be with them. I was in a relationship for 5 years with someone who never respected my identity to the way that I wanted them to respect me. And after I finally got the courage to walk out, I met someone who I love very much and who treats me like I need to be treated. So that's my mantra.
I would say, I'm going to do 2 really quick, but be you, be authentically you. And that's something that I just got divorced 2 years ago. Living in your light will attract people to you whom you want to be in your life. Don't ever hide who you are. And to my trans and TGNC folks who may be binaries, more specifically trans women, disclose safely, early, and in public places, and making sure, if you can, to disclose multiple times prior to ever meeting somebody. It is a matter of life and death, and I implore you to be very, very careful and disclose early and safely.
Yes.
For me, yeah, definitely like piggybacking off the first point of just like be with people who you feel you be authentic AF around and feel super safe around, and you can feel safe talking to them about anything. You can feel safe calling them out on stuff. You don't need to hide stuff from them. Like, just feel like you can be yourself and feel like safe and stuff.
Great.
I would say you are beautiful and lovable just as you are, and you deserve all the love. I guess you deserve all that love in your whole authentic being. So you should never have to hide who you are. You deserve all that love, and if somebody can't see it, they don't deserve you.
Amen. I would like to thank all of our amazing panelists for coming out today. This was really a blast, and it's honestly, I really don't like a lot how historically our movement has been and how it's ignored the amazing Black feminists, Black wominists, abolition feminists who have really paved the ground for gender rights to be actually inclusive. And I thank you all again for being vulnerable and sharing their knowledge in this debate. I will send you all an email. I have to hop over now to do our closer, but thank you all for coming out. Everybody, please go back to sessions. The closing session is now open, and I'm so excited. Thank you. Bye.